So this is our first in a series of PowerShell lessons, and we'll be going over the components that need to be downloaded, how to use them to connect to your Office 365 environment, and how to run a few commands to see licenses and subscription information. So in order to connect to Office 365 via PowerShell, you must download and install two components. The first is the Microsoft Online Services Sign-In Assistant. This is installed as a service, so you can check to see if this is already installed by running services.msc, but make sure it's the 64-bit version. This component will facilitate the authentication and session management between your PowerShell session and Microsoft Azure Active Directory. After all, the users and other tenant objects are all stored in Azure AD, which is the backend directory services provider for Office 365. Once that's installed, you need to download the Microsoft Azure Active Directory module for Windows PowerShell. Again, make sure this is the 64-bit version. This module will give you the libraries you need to run all the commandlets you need to manage Azure AD objects. In PowerShell, they're called commandlets instead of commands. And every time you want to use PowerShell to manage something outside of what PowerShell can do natively, you most likely will need a module to install. This is so PowerShell can recognize all the specialized commandlets that we will be issuing. Even after installation, the module will have to be loaded every time we launch PowerShell, but I'll get to that in the next slide. Once you've installed the Azure Active Directory module, there are two different ways to load it into PowerShell. Option 1 is to run PowerShell how you normally would, and then just issue the import module ms online command. I'm going to stop using commandlet every time. Option 2 is to run the shortcut called Windows Azure Active Directory module for Windows PowerShell, which should be available after installing the Azure AD module. This is just a shortcut to PowerShell while also passing the above import command right into the shortcut. We'll see this when we do the demo in a few slides. If you plan to run any scripts, you should load PowerShell with the Run as Administrator option, and I'll explain why a few slides from now. Once you've loaded the module into PowerShell, you should save your credentials to a PowerShell credential object by using the command $usercredential equals get-credential. The get-credential command launches a box where you type in your username and password. This is the safest and best way to save your credentials to an object, since the security of masking the password is built into the credential request window. If you're worried about saving your credentials to a variable, know that they're securely saved and only for this session. When we exit PowerShell, the credential object will be destroyed. Lastly, we can run the connect-msol service command while passing the user-defined credential object we created. Azure will recognize what tenant you belong to from your login name and connect you if you have the proper privileges. I will assume you're a global admin if you're planning to manage the environment via PowerShell. I'll take this opportunity to say that if you're not familiar with PowerShell and this doesn't make sense to you, then I would recommend learning it. Don't just try to memorize all this. There are plenty of resources on PowerShell online and tons of good books. Platform Scholar will be creating a mini course on PowerShell sometime in early 2017, so look for that as well. There are 4 subscription commands in the PowerShell module, but only 2 that we'll be focusing on. Get-msol subscription and get-msol account SKU. The other 2 we might go over in Objective 3.3 when we discuss user management with PowerShell. Let's look at the output of these 2 commands in closer detail. Get-msol subscription, MSOL stands for Microsoft Online by the way, lists all the license subscription purchases that you've made. So if you'd purchase licenses in multiple transactions or have mixed licensing with different plans and tiers, this command would list the names and object ID of each of them, along with the total licenses purchased and the status of the subscription. Warning means expired, but within 90 days. Get-msol account SKU will show all the licenses subtotaled by the subscription plan with the total licenses purchased, but will also show you the licenses that are active, in warning, or expired, and overall consumed. Here we can see this account has 25 licenses. All of them have been consumed or assigned to users, and they have all expired. This was a trial account I set up previously. They give you 25 licenses as part of the trial, and I assigned them all to users. After 30 days, however, the trial account expires unless you purchase the plan. This is what we are seeing. Expired subscriptions can still be used for up to 90 days, and then they're gone. This is so you can keep using it if you forgot to renew or if you need time to migrate data out of the tenant. So why do we need to run PowerShell as administrator? Well, by default, PowerShell will not let you run any scripts. This is because the execution policy is set to what we call restricted, meaning no scripts can be run. You can only issue commands or commandlets interactively by typing them in the window. If you want to change the execution policy, you need local admin rights, which requires you to run PowerShell as the administrator. The execution policy resets after each session, so this needs to be done every time you use PowerShell. Why do most people recommend setting it to remote signed? Well, it has to do with trusted sources. The zones at the bottom, internet and untrusted, are considered remote security zones. Remote signed means scripts from remote security zones need to be signed by a publisher that you have explicitly set up a trust for. For all other zones, such as your computer or from your local trusted network, scripts can be run whether they are signed or come from trusted publishers or not. This means any script you create will run with no problem. If, however, you download a script from the internet and it's not signed or you've not set up a trust with the publisher, you'll have to edit it and then save it again to change the security zone to your computer. Okay, let's take a look at PowerShell in action. Okay, so we're going to run PowerShell, and I have it pinned to my taskbar right here. I can just click it if I wanted to run it, but I'm going to right-click it, and then I have this Run as Administrator option here. Okay, I'm going to bring this over to the screen here. As you can see, it says Administrator, so I know that I'm running this as Administrator. Now, if this is too small for you, you can go into the Properties, and under Font here, you can pick whatever font and what size you want. We'll make this a little bigger. Let's try 16. I also like the blue background that it defaults to. Okay, so I didn't run the Azure Active Directory module for Windows PowerShell shortcut. If I wanted to, I could just click here and say Azure Active Directory, and then here we could say this. Just to show you what's going on here, let me open the file location. And let's go into the properties for this shortcut. And what you'll see here, although it's a little tough, is let me copy and paste this into a notepad. This is just calling PowerShell and also passing the command import-module ms online. But we're just going to type this in manually. Okay. So we'll do import module ms online. Okay, easy enough. Now we've loaded the module. Next, we're going to save our user credentials. So we'll do $ user credential, and the $ specifies that it's a variable, or in this case, an object. And we'll set it to get credential, which is a function that will launch a window. Okay, we'll put in our credential here at no, it's not Adria, it's going to be AJD admin 365 at pfslab01.onmicrosoft.com, and a password, and that's it. So now we've got this credentials saved into the $ user credential object. So now we'll go ahead and we'll type in connect-msol service, and we'll pass it the credential parameter, and we'll specify our user credential object. And that's it. We don't get a success. We don't get a pat on the back. You know, as long as there's no error, that means it worked. But if we want to, we can run a couple of those license commands just to make sure. So the first thing I'll actually do is set the execution policy to show you how that works. Execution policy to remote signed. And it's going to say, hey, are you sure you want to do this? You might end up running some scripts that you aren't trusted. We say, yes, that's fine. Okay, so that's done. Now we'll go back and we'll do get MSOL subscription. Remember, we're signed into our tenant because of our username that we used as part of our user credential object. So it knows what tenant we are. And here we have a 25 licenses of Enterprise Pack, which is the E3. And if we do get MSOL account SKU, we can see that we've got 2 consumed out of the 25, and that would be the admin account and that test user that we created. And so that's it. Next up, configuring new features and updates.